Okay, so before we hop into the meat of this video, I want to take a minute to acknowledge the fact that when I made the initial video talking about this particular case and this particular instance in the working history of candidate Christian Urrutia, I hit the publish button and I did not reach out for a comment from either the Urrutia campaign or 350NH. That was a flub on my part. Really should have done that. Wish I had. My initial thought when I was talking about this is that we're looking at public information. This is a political analysis channel, and that I was simply commenting on, publicly available knowledge. But apparently this was a little bit more like reporting. Now, I've tried to say many times that I don't really like the label of journalist. But in this particular instance, it's sort of a blurry line. And usually when I run into blurry lines in my life, I try to, err on the side of caution and do the safe thing. I didn't really do that this time. I'm going to do it in the future because I think that's the right thing to do. And I also think it's the right thing to do to acknowledge when you screw up a little bit. Just kind of how it goes. But with that out of the way, I'll probably come up again a little bit later. But I want to talk about the fact that I did reach out to both the Urrutia campaign and 350NH, and I have pseudo statements from both of them. We'll start with 350s. We're all in this together, and moving through conflict is essential in our collective fight for a better, more just future. 350NH Action's grassroots campaign to stop fossil fuels and win clean, affordable energy for all are the focus of our work, and elections are just a small piece of that. We believe it is our responsibility to hold elected officials accountable to the people and have a record of doing so. Ocean mining operations are concerning, and everything that humans do, we firmly believe there should be strong environmental protections, and that polluters should be held accountable for the damages they cause. Our endorsement process and planning this year took place over 6 months and many hours of research and conversation to ensure any candidate we endorse will make polluters pay, put a moratorium on data centers, and support clean energy expansion. Our staff is taking the time to discuss the new information that has been shared about past legal cases and discussing next steps as an organization. We're available anytime you would like to talk. So, I personally think that's a pretty good statement, considering this came up fast and it's an organization. It's not like one individual just calls all the shots. The board has to meet. They have to figure out what they want to do. And I would assume from this statement that is exactly what they are going to do. My general attitude is that I don't like or enjoy having to say things that are less than pleasant about organizations like 350 that do a lot of really good work in the state of New Hampshire. They were pretty involved in the recent activism that took place in opposition to the Nottingham data center. I think they deserve credit for that. It's a shame when somebody has to point out an error on the part of an organization, a coalition of people that are trying to do really good work. And my, assessment of this is I kind of feel like figuring this out should have maybe taken a little more than 6 months. It's my personal opinion. Fine. They did what they did. They, seem to have felt like they had tried to do the best of their due diligence possible, and there's stuff that they missed. And this happened to be one of those things. And, I think that now that they are exposed to new information, they're going to do something about that, whether we see it publicly or not. That part, I don't think any of us have any control over. If I hear anything, I'll let you guys know. But generally speaking, I would advise, even though they maybe, for some of you didn't make the best call on this one, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Okay. That's just my attitude when it comes to 350NH. But let's talk about the statement or lack thereof that I received from the Urrutia campaign. We've reviewed your video It fails to meet basic standards of objectivity, fairness, and accuracy, presents a distorted account of Christian's record, and was published without even giving the campaign an opportunity to respond, which is basic journalistic standard. Given that, we will not be providing comment. That's part of the reason I wanted to address that on the top of the video, because they're kind of not wrong about the portion about reaching out for comment. Again, I personally think that's somewhat of a murky line, because it's not like I was given, exclusive information that I was breaking. This was right out there in the open. So I don't know that I fully agree with the critique, but I will take it under advisement and behave appropriately, pursuant to this. That said, I did my best to present that fairly. And if we're going to be fair, I'm going to give a balance right now. First off, Christian Urrutia's campaign has received donation from the CEO of Odyssey Sea Exploration. Now, in addition to that, there's information that I'd like to share a little bit, because I think there's some confusion, and people will look at the concept of collecting phosphate from the ocean and they'll say, well, that's not drilling, right? You're not going after oil, you're not going after fossil fuels. But for those of you that don't understand what phosphate mining, whether onshore or offshore, entails, let's just go into that a little bit. So here from the Center for Biological Diversity, synthetic phosphate fertilizer poses a serious threat to our environment. Phosphate rock mining, along with the inorganic fertilizers and animal feed supplements and pesticides for which phosphate is mined, pollute our air, contaminate our water, and destroy invaluable wildlife habitat. Most mining of phosphate rock involves clearing large swaths of vegetation and digging up the soil beneath to reach the phosphate ore containing matrix 60 to 80 feet below the surface. This matrix is then transported by a pipeline to a nearby plant, where the phosphate ore is forcibly separated from the sand and clay by a process known as benefication. Benefication creates clay-settling ponds, further destroying the habitat, from which it can take decades to remove water and which can scar the landscape and contaminate the surrounding habitat. Now, again, this is more specifically related to onshore, but there's an incident off the coast of Namibia where mining in the sea was expressly addressed. And from this article on Ambrook, large-scale seabed mining in such a productive and sensitive area risks permanent habitat degradation, increased turbidity, oxygen depletion, and the release of toxic substances, all of which directly undermine fish recruitment and food web stability. In a system that underpins livelihoods, food security, and national revenue, a precautionary approach is essential. Look, this is not necessarily good for the environment. That's just the way it is. Using these things and mining for it anywhere is detrimental. And there are other ways to obtain phosphate. That's just how it is. And this article that I just took the quote from explains that a little bit more. So I would encourage people to read through, again, the sources that I've indicated in the description below. So that's part one. Part two is that when it comes to Christian, I want to point out that the criticism here is not that he's defending the actual mining itself, right? What he's doing is he's defending the corporation that wanted to do the mining, was not permitted to do that mining by a sovereign nation, and then decided to sue that administration, that government, that country, for what's functionally reparations for not being able to exploit their environment. That's what happened there. And that's a notable difference. But the other argument would be, well, he wasn't a partner in the firm. So he didn't have a choice. He had to just take the case that he sat on. Sure, okay. But we can all quit our job anytime we want. And that was not necessarily Christian's first case. You know what I'm saying? He had a history of working in law. He had done legal work as an attorney prior to that. And if he's so staunchly uh, for environmental protections, then why would he not quit his job over a case like that? This is about moral consistency. It's pretty simple. And I do understand that when you're an entry level lawyer, when you're just trying to break into things, that it can be hard. You have to work on cases that you don't agree with. I think there was some choice there. And then following that, it's like if he did have political ambitions, he probably should have understood that, you know, having this kind of thing on his record and saying something that's exactly the opposite doesn't necessarily send a clear signal. You're getting pretty mixed messages about that. And generally speaking, when you do something that's not so great and you want to go put yourself in the public eye, people tend to respect saying, I was wrong. I think that's a thing that a lot of people are super hungry for with media right now, with politicians, with anybody that has any position of power, is for them to admit that they were wrong, acknowledge the thing that they screwed up, and pledge to do better, express knowing what they need to do in order to correct the problem, the steps they need to take to move forward. Something that I try to explain to people all the time about being on the left is like, if you don't have a path to rehabilitation, then what's the point? That'll only narrow your coalition. Another thing to point out is that it's not like this is the only thing that Christian ever did. He's done good things too. And I'm not, I'm not so much of an activist that I would say we can't acknowledge the rights and the wrongs that people have committed over time, but to pretend that this wasn't part of his history is sort of trying to whitewash everything that he did. And I think it's important for us to take everybody for their pros and cons and all. That's part of doing this is learning how to sit and live with the thing that's uncomfortable. But in this instance, there's certain factors that go into this, the willingness to participate in something like that once you're that far in your career and not say, no, I think I'm going to hold off on this. That's the part where you have to start asking whether or not this elected official is going to be a good representative for you in the country, right? As we move forward with progressive goals, looking to just sort of right the wrongs of everything that's happened with the conservative and the neoliberal governments that we've experienced over the past 20, 30 years, I think it's probably fair to say that repeating the same mistakes is not going to produce different results. And I think that's why a lot of people are going for much more morally consistent candidates throughout the country right now. Why you see the left move so heavily in that direction, why it gets so much more intense, because those little differences matter. And ultimately, we need to be able to hold everybody to account when they do something that's not beneficial, including the media, including politicians, including organizations, nonprofits, government apparatuses. Anybody and everybody needs to own up to the things that they did wrong. And part of the reason that I've tried to approach making this video in the way that I have is because I want to demonstrate to people that even when it kind of sucks to have to say that you might have been able to do better, you got to do it. And it's also at this point that I probably need to address the fact that whether I like the label or not, I'm probably doing some type of journalism here. And I've talked to a number of people that worked in editing, people that are journalists, and they think it's fair to use that word for what's happening on this channel. So I may have to begrudgingly accept that. I think we all have some stuff that we need to step up to and be rational about. And I'm excited to see that 350 is reconsidering things a little bit, trying to figure out exactly what they need to do about it. I feel like I'm able to clear my conscience on this side. I don't really know where the Urrutia campaign stands, because rather than doing what 350 or I did, they decided to double down. And I've chosen deliberately to not include the names of the people that sent me those emails. I don't think it's especially relevant. Um, it's not about being personal. I don't want to be fucking political TMZ. Waste of my time. I'd rather give you guys real information. So, more comes up, at least on this or with anything else, you guys know I'll share it with you. Take care.